awesome event covering a great range of topics. So Raz invited me to come and talk about app insights and log analytics, and kind of a favorite topic of mine. So see if I can get past this funny intro slide here. There we go. So for anybody who's not met me before, I've been a Microsoft MVP for, I think it's 13 years now, maybe even, definitely 12 years anyway. So I'm a freelance cloud architect based up in Newcastle in the north of the UK. My blog and my Twitter are there if anybody wants to kind of reach out and connect after the session. What I wanted to talk about today, though, was I've talked quite a bit about log analytics and app insights in the past, and today I want to focus on not just the kind of overview and basics of the technology, but I want to talk about a real world project, how we use these technologies, and sort of 3 or 4 use cases about how they helped us, what we did with them, and how it made a difference, and kind of like, kind of give people some inspiration of things that you could do with these technologies is really where I want to come from, because I think that'll hopefully help people the most. And then there's a whole bunch of links at the end I've got where if anybody wants to know more about particular aspects of the talk, you can go and sort of deeper dive on some of that. So what we're going to talk about is a company that I've done some work with, who's been a big sort of player in investing in Microsoft iPaaS technology. So they've sort of got a multi-year investment in building solutions with Logic Apps, and all the the good technologies in that iPaaS space. They've also got an investment in Microsoft Data Platform as well, and they've delivered quite a number of projects now. And we've got in the architecture, we've got things like SAP, Power Platform, Power BI, Workday, all the common apps we've pretty much got. But I think what makes this company interesting is the volume of integrations that we have. So I think just to give you an idea of scale, we've got 5 test environments. We've got not far off 2,000 Logic apps across the 5 test environments. So I think we're probably up there with in the bigger scale of users of things like Logic apps. We've got loads of functions, API, Service Bus Synapse, all the things people talk about at conferences. We've been using them for quite a while. And when it comes to app insights and log analytics, so when I think about the typical integration platform, the technologies that you might use, this is a diagram I use quite a bit where we kind of take the competency that you want. So you might want AI, API, ETL, whatever. Which technologies go into which box? I think something people always kind of wonder about with there being so many different services on Azure. So I think this is a good way of kind of articulating, if you're thinking about doing this thing, here's the technology you probably should look at. And on this box, app insights and log analytics really fit over in this monitoring and management area, and that's really what we're going to look at today. So to kind of before we get into a few demos and stuff, I really just want to kind of help people understand some of the business problems that we're trying to address, and I just want to kind of show that. So I think it'll help people see the demos kind of come to life and fit to a business scenario. So we have this, in this company, part of what we do is this idea of developing a petrochemical plant. It's been going on for a couple of years. We have a petrochemical plant that will create product that gets placed into rail cars. Customers come along and buy a rail car and that gets shipped to them. So we have these different use cases. The first one's this plant production. So we have the plant, and then the plant sends messages to the main part of the business telling it about what products we're making in that plant. So if you imagine, it's a bit like a big cauldron, different stuff goes in and we create different products with that. The second one is the loading of a rail car. So at this point, the rail car comes into the plant. We have a loading dock. The rail car gets loaded and shipped to a storage yard. And then the plant would send a notification to our systems to say this rail car's been loaded. And that's a really important part of the process, because when that rail car gets loaded, we then need to track it through its life cycle. And if you imagine, a rail car gets loaded, goes and delivers a product, comes back and gets reloaded again. So next off, we'll have the shipping of an order. So we may have a customer who says, can I have a rail car? We arrange for one or more cars to go to that customer, and it gets shipped, and we get notifications that it's leaving the yard and going to deliver an order. And they've got that relationship between which rail cars deliver which orders. As the rail car goes on its journey, We get notifications. So we've got some quite cool things from our transport systems, and we have a GPS thing on rail cars as well. So we get notifications every time a car moves, every time it stops, every time it sort of hits a major leg on the journey. And then finally, when the customer gets it, we get that confirmation it's been delivered, and then the rail car would come back to get more product. So those are the kind of key use cases we're going to look at today. As I say, it's part of a much bigger picture, but I think these are really interesting ones because I've done a few demos to help understand how the technology can play in this sort of story. So we've got this plant measurement data, which is about what we're making, and then we've got railcar loaded, railcar shipped, shipping status and delivery, which are all about the life cycle of a railcar. And we have information that comes into our platform, and then for the purpose of today, we're going to focus on some of these apps that it gets the message and gets delivered to. So we've got a transport system, SAP, Dataverse, and then we've got Synapse as our EDMS platform. So if we take a step back for a second, think about the architecture that we've got. So here we've got, this is just a typical representation of some of our interfaces. So we've got APIM receives the messages, gives an easy way for us to expose an entry point to a partner or to a system. The messages come in and we have functions that sit behind the API management. They might do a little bit of work, drop messages onto service bus, and then we pub sub. So we've got on the top side, we've got this background function that just gets messages that we set on service bus to go to the data platform. And it shoves them all over to Synapse. And then we've got logic apps that do a lot of kind of typical integration workflow scenarios. So we might get a message that goes to one system for a scenario and another system. Loaded railcars might go to SAP and shipped ones might go to Dataverse, something like that. So we've got a lot of things going on now. Today's talk's really about log analytics and app insights. So one of the things that I come across the most is when customers start looking at these technologies, it's like, well, how many app insights should I have? What components should have what? And this really is how we would usually set this up. So if you think the first thing to understand with app insights is a while ago they changed how you set them up. So now you have what's called a workspace based version of app insights. So what that really means is that an app insights is connected to an underlying log analytics workspace. And what we normally do is for each of our key compute areas, we'd have an app insights instance, but they all point to the same log analytics under the hood. So here you can see, and you'll see these resources in my Azure in a minute, we've got an API management. It has its own app insights. We've got a logic app standard, which has one, a function, which has one. And what we usually do is if you think about things like the app insights, the app service plans that your logic apps and your functions live on, we usually have one app insights per plan, but then they all share this log analytics under the hood. And then one thing to just note is when you've got consumption logic apps, you can have connectivity to send data to log analytics directly, but that doesn't have an app insight. So just be aware that there's a subtle difference between logic apps standard and consumption there. So what we're going to do is, hopefully that gives a bit of a background. What we want to do is look at about 4 or 5 different scenarios. We're going to look at what the problem was, how the technology can help us, and really hope that, the ideas that'll give people some inspiration of stuff they can look at. So first off, performance and load monitoring. So the problem is I've got this integration that sends all this data from the plant. It comes into my integration platform, and I've got this function that forwards it over to Synapse, and that can kind of we can get quite a large volume going through there at any one time. So the architecture for that is that the data comes in, hits APIM, hits our API functions, drops onto service bus, and we pub sub it to different systems. That background component writes to an event hub that belongs in our data platform. And that event hub uses the capture feature, which writes Avro files out to the data lake, and then we can just query them direct from Synapse. So if anybody wants to know a bit more about this architecture at a lower level, particularly around the Synapse area, I've got some good blog articles that talk through how we do this. Today I'm going to focus on the app insights and log analytics bit, but just kind of check my blog or reach out if you want to know a bit more about the other bits. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this as a point to jump into my Azure now and just have a quick look at what's in my resource group here. So I've got a resource group with a bunch of stuff in for these demos. And what I've got is, to begin with, I've got my API management here. So I've got in my APIs, you'll be able to see, if I just stretch that out, we've got some inbound APIs for the transport stuff. The health one will come on to later. We've got this plant data API. That's the one we're going to look at here. So I've got a really simple one where I've got this submit tags. So there's tags in the plant that make measurements of different things. So maybe how much pressure, water, different things being used in the plant, and it gets submitted to this API. So if I've got an app insights, and we can see down here, I've got one connected to my API management. Turning on app insights for an API is really as easy as a tick in a box. So I can go down here and I can just enable it, tell it which logger to use, and then I can configure some settings down here about what I want to capture. If I want to capture some headers, capture body requests, etc. It's really straightforward to set up. And so that's kind of step one. The second step would be if we take a look at the functions. So here we've got one of the functions, which is a back end, and I'm kind of going to focus on this little bit of code here. So with functions, again, it's as simple as you just set a key in the app config to tell it which app insights to use. So that's, straight away you'll potentially start getting some telemetry. There's things you can configure in the function app about how much telemetry you get. But the bit I really want to talk about here is I want to set some custom information. So here I can log my own message just using this ilog that the functions runtime lets me use. And I can set some custom properties here. So I can set a message type. And in this case, I'm just recording the message data that came in. When App Insights gathers telemetry about my function, it'll basically include that on the messages that come through. So that just starts giving me my custom data. And again, it's really simple with this function. And on the background function that reads from the queue and forwards to data lake, it's again the same. I've got the ilog up here, and I just set some custom properties so I can actually check stuff in the logs here. Now, before we jump into the running of the demo, I just want to kind of show a little bit of my service bus. You can see I've got some topics up here for each of the key different areas. So I get a message, hits the API, gets processed, dropped on a topic, and I can send it to different places. So this tag data, what you'll find here is I've got this subscription that forwards it to a queue, and I can actually add a subscription to all of my different queues here. This one that says forward to EDMS, and that basically forwards all the messages to a single queue, and my function app just takes everything through to the EDMS platform. So it's an easy way of getting all my data across. But what we want to have a look at is this performance aspect. So what I'm going to do next is if we jump into the application insights over here, so there's a feature called live metrics. So this is a great way of getting a real-time or very close to real-time dashboard about what's happening in this app insights component. Now, I can open this for my API management, but likewise, I can open it for my background functions as well. And really, if you think of what we were looking at before, is your app insights is really a view on the data from the underlying log analytics bit, and it'll stream in through your app insights into log analytics. And this live view will just give us the closest we can get to some real-time data. Now, what I've got, I'm just going to step to the side a second. I've got a little demo that I'm just going to kick off on my laptop, and it'll start sending some data, simulating the plant burst and a bunch of tag updates. Now, I've got rail cars running at the same time in a test logic app, so that'll be the little bit of traffic that you just saw to begin with. But we'll see that we're starting to get these little blue dots coming through, and that's all of the plant data that's just streaming into this API. So on the left here, we've got all the API calls, and on the right here, we've got the background function that's processing the data into the data platform. And you can see at the minute, I've got just a little console app on my laptop running. So we're pinging in about 44 messages a second, and we've got about 40 a second hitting into Synapse, hitting into the event hub that writes into the data lake so Synapse can query. So that's an easy way for us to kind of just see, is the system doing stuff, what's going on, how much load is it under. But there's also some other features in App Insights as well. So here we can go and look at the performance areas, a really common one. So if I've got some concerns about how my API is performing, for example, I can go and have a look in here. And if we look for the plant API, so I think I've just scrolled past it there. If we have a quick look. So here we can see, I've had, in the last 24 hours, about 13,000 calls. And I can start seeing like when they've been happening, and I can use these percentiles here, which we use quite often for troubleshooting performance issues and getting like a baseline of how does that API function perform. So I'm getting, 50th percentile is about 30 milliseconds, 95th percentile is about 130. So that's not bad when you think it's on a serverless function, getting 10 threads concurrently pinging messages from my laptop up to, I think this is in Ireland, I think, and I'm over in Newcastle. So that's reasonable. We're getting through that, and that'll be getting into the data lake pretty quick. So this is the area you would really look at to troubleshoot performance, and you can dig much deeper into this, and you can check out some of the links to find out more. Really, today I want to just talk about some of the things you should be looking at for your solution. The next one is the failures area. So here I've got the problem of in my functions that are coming in, I actually simulate some errors and just return a dodgy error response on a sort of occasional basis. So here you can see, I could go and see, right, these are the ones that have had errors recently. Here's some of the problems that they've had, and I can have a look at like what the individual errors and common errors, and I can kind of dig in and start having a look at what actually happened here. So I can see here I've got this one that came into my API management, forwarded to the backend function, which was going to write a service bus, but it just threw an error, and that kind of bubbled back to the client. So that's, again, another really common feature of starting to look for common errors inside your platform. Now, next up, we're going to jump onto another area to kind of have a little bit of a look at. But I think just to recap, what I wanted to get across in that first demo is you get all that kind of performance metrics and deep things you can deep dive into to troubleshoot, but actually it's really easy to configure. So API management was just set a logger and tick a box and turn it on. Functions was really just configure the telemetry key to start getting the data going to App Insights, and then I could add a line of code, adds a custom property. And we'll look at some of those a bit more later on. Next up, we want to have a look at end-to-end tracing. So the problem we've got here is many of us are building architectures now which have lots of components in them. We tend to build the idea of a microservice type component, whether it be a serverless logic app, a function app with a few functions in. They all kind of work together. But because they're broken into fragmented parts, how do you get that holistic view, tracing end to end through the execution across a number of components? That's a big challenge. So we want to have a look at how we can do that. And what I want to kind of get across in this demo is that there's some great stuff you get for next to no work. There's also a couple of gaps Microsoft have got, and you can kind of work around the gaps a little bit, but I just want to kind of make sure people are aware of them. So here we're going to look at predominantly the railcar loaded message, but we're also going to check on the shipping status and railcar delivered just to show some of the variations. But the key thing is these have data that comes in, goes through our logic apps and hits those back-end apps. And it really just looks like this architecture we looked at earlier. Message hits API, functions write a service bus, and then we pub sub. Now, with a loaded railcar, one of the things I wanted to do with this demo is kind of show the difference between consumption and standard logic apps. So when the loaded railcar message comes in, it hits the service bus, and I actually run a consumption logic app, and that'll basically do a bit of processing. So I'll call a few APIs, and I do some conversions on the data, and then I write it back to another topic that pub subs to standard logic apps, where there's about 4 different logic apps that go to the different systems. So that gives me a good way of showing the differences between those two. So let's start with, I've got this test runner here that basically simulates that railcar journey we talked about earlier. And you can see there's a whole bunch of them still running at the minute. And what I actually do here is I kind of kick this off, and it just makes a bunch of calls out to APIM, and I hope this hurries up and loads up. See if we can get that to load up. There we go. So a little bit of variables at the start, but what I'm kind of doing is going trigger reloaded railcar to API management, wait for a while. I think it waits for about an hour between each bit, then send a shipped message, then do a loop for about 10 hours. Every hour ping a shipping update, and then a delivered update. And that actually basically drives load through the system, simulating my journey. Now, what I can look at in API management, again, we've got this API, which is our transport API, with an operation for each of these different events that just come through and hit the functions. And in this demo, the functions are exactly the same as in the last one, so I'm going to skip that bit out because I actually want to show the loaded railcar logic app here. So if we have a look when this one processes, we get the data coming in from service bus, and the first thing we do is I've got this parse JSON message here. Now, my logic apps are all, the consumption ones are connected to log analytics, which you can see if I just open it up here. So you can see with the diagnostic settings, I just turn on sending it to log analytics, and that's it basically, and it'll send loads of data about what's happening. But what I can actually do in the parse JSON's a really good shape to do this on. When I process that message, I can send some tracked properties from data that comes out from that action, and that'll give me some custom bits of data I can query in log analytics and stuff. So that's a really easy way of getting your consumption data to go across. And likewise, if we have a look. So we have a look at my my standard logic apps over here. So if we go and jump in the workflows, so actually first step just to show it is connected to an app Insights. Again, really easy. We just configure it during the deployment of the logic app, and that means all of the workflows in here will be to send to whatever app Insights I've set up. So in my logic app here, if I go and take a look at the railcar loaded CRM, I'll just bring the designer up here. You can see I did exactly the same thing as in the last one. So I've got my railcar parse message here, and I can again set these tracked properties, and that'll send data to App Insights. Every time that add action executes, I'll have those properties that I can query. Now, what we want to do in App Insights, I'm going to start over here with the API management one, and we've got this feature which is the transaction search. So I'm going to look for the loaded message. We'll have a look and see if we can find ones. There's a few different railcar loaded, which is where the enrichment of data in that consumption logic app calls out to APIs to do stuff. But the one I'm looking for is where is it? So this one here. So this is the transport API. So this is going to give me what happens when that API gets hit. Now, this is going to really highlight the one limitation that I want to talk about on this, because what you'll notice is that when that API operation gets queried, it actually starts from here at API management, but it starts trying to wind into the data to see what things it can identify as a match to from other components that it can link through. So if you notice here, it said, right, we've got it on API management. We forwarded it to the railcar loaded API function, which is this bit here. That then sent it to service bus. And then it identified that the data platform bridge function kicked in. That got the message and it forwarded it to the event hub. So that gives us some end-to-end tracing of that going into the data platform. But the thing that's missing here, you'll notice, is where's the logic apps gone? And that's really where the gap I want to talk about for this moment is. So what we'll do, I'm just going to jump into the App Insights for log analytics for the standard logic apps. If you give me a second. Okay, so go into a transaction search here. So we take this one here, probably is a good example. So that'll be one of the one of the railcar loaded to CRM logic apps. Now, what you'll notice, I'm in a different app Insights now, and I've just looked for that loaded railcar, and you can see it's given me kind of what you would see in the run history. So if we open this, and we go back over here. So if we just open one of the instances that have run, we'll see the typical logic app run history. And I think just understanding for a second about what Logic Apps does when it sends data to App Insights. So you're going to get request and trace messages pretty much for every shape in this workflow that goes through, which is why you see quite a bit of data in here. And if I look for, say that's my parse one here that we were looking for, and I should be able to see there's a bit of stuff going on over here about, what that message looked like, what telemetry was captured. So the thing that we can identify is we've got two different app insights, and they've, like the APIMs wound the end-to-end for part of it. The Logic App one's got the other part, but they weren't joined together. Now, what I found when I was looking at this is that it's to do with how the telemetry passes across between systems. So if we go to Service Bus for a second, and what I've done is I've put a subscription on this railcar loaded just to capture some of the messages so I can show you what they look like. And if you look in here, so this message would have been written to the queue by the API function. So we can see this is what the message looked like. And the key thing is these properties over here. So we've got this diagnostic ID property, which is actually set as the equivalent of a trace parent header that can be used in HTTP. So out of the box, what my function app does is when it writes the message to the queue, without me writing any code at all, it injected this diagnostic ID as a property on the message. So when the other function read it from the queue and processed it, it can wire that trace information together automatically. And that's how the functions are doing the end-to-end tracing. Now, the problem is in the Logic apps, if we look at how it picks this message up over here, is it doesn't really have that property set automatically. So you can see we haven't really got any headers up here. I think if I remember right, I put that message on here when I was fiddling around trying to put a custom property on, but it doesn't automatically wire it together. Now, what you can do, there's a really good blog post by Toon where he shows how you can custom set your client tracking ID. And what you can do, if you call like over HTTP, you can set it yourself and you can get things to wire together. And I had a little bit of a go at doing that. So you can see here, if you notice my railcar delivered, what I actually did was I tried to do that myself, where I kind of, we'll just let this open. So I read the message from a topic here, and I kind of call the Logic app, child Logic app that does the work myself. And I try to sort of send that diagnostic ID myself into the Logic app as a header. So you can see I'm setting these headers here, and I get that trace parent, but it still doesn't wire it up, which is a bit frustrating for some reason. But what I did find is that in the shipping status one, if you notice over here, let me get the right app insights back. So we go. Okay, so we're just looking for this one here, this transport API shipping status. If we take a look at this one, so this one should unwind in a lot more detail now. Touch wood, fingers crossed when it comes up. Right, so what's happened here is this one's got a little bit of extra stuff on it. So here, my APIM received the call. This line here, I called the backend function, which wrote a service bus. And this bit down the bottom here, I'll just collapse it. That's the data platform function that sends stuff to Synapse. But what happens now is this one here, I added an extra function to that background function stuff where it reads the message from service bus for the shipping status. So that function automatically wires into the end-to-end trace here. And what I did is I made that function call a Logic app over HTTP. So we've got this test workflow. So I'll see if I can get rid of that. Okay, so if we have a quick look. So this test workflow here, I just was kind of trying to figure out why it wasn't flowing it across. And what happens is if we look at the headers here, so you'll see that up here, these headers automatically get added by the function that read from the queue and called the logic app over HTTP. And what happens is when that's done, the logic app automatically then gets wired into this kind of telemetry here. So I can see I go from my function into my logic app, and then if I'd put all the code in to wire up calling it Dataverse and everything, it would have all strung together exactly like I want. So that's the limitation I want people to be aware of. I think something we'll see if we can reach out to the product team and see if they can guide us about why that's not working. But it's almost like that logic app service bus receiver is not processing the telemetry from the queue, because the diagnostic ID is there to wire it up. It's just not doing it in the logic app, and it doesn't do it even if you set that client tracking ID, which is a little bit frustrating. Now, what I can do, if we take a step back for a minute, and let's go. So let's go over here and just grab. So we're going to grab, there's an ID called a load slip ID that's on these messages. So the message that comes in for the loaded rail car, you can see here as load slip. So there's the load slip ID. Now, if we go to log analytics, so remember that all these app insights, they all write the log analytics under the hood, and we're going to look at the logs a little bit more later. But what I can do is I can do like a union. So if I do a union across app requests and app traces, and then I just do a wildcard search. So I'm doing a wildcard search for that load slip ID. We should see that there'll be some data in here, and you can see that. So we just take a quick look. We've got something from the data platform bridge as row number 2. This one at the top's from API management. And then these ones here are all from Logic App Standard. So even though App Insights didn't unwind the data to an end-to-end trace correctly, the data actually is in Log Analytics under the hood, and it looks like it kind of has the right data in. You can see the roles here that they came from the Logic App and the function apps and stuff, but it's just somehow the Logic App Insights just doesn't unwind it. So that's really the thing I wanted to get across now. If we take a step back, so one of the things about this end-to-end tracing is it's really powerful. Hopefully it came across that while I'm looking at some of the deep dive stuff you can do in App Insights, to wire it up really wasn't very hard. What I did, if we went to the first demo, I tick a box in API management, I add a telemetry key in the functions. In Logic Apps, I just turn it on, and I may add some custom tracked properties, and I can start seeing all this stuff come together. But the thing is, the data that you're going to get from App Insights and Log Analytics from those features, you get a lot of data, and we'll look at the difference in that in a bit. But all that data just means that there's so much there. It's powerful to use, but you need to understand how it's structured and what you can do with it. And what you might want to do is just have this thing of, well, what if I just want a simple log? Is there anything I can do that's a bit easier to get me up and running, add some immediate value, and then I can spend more time digging into it later? So here we're going to look at loaded railcar again in a slightly different feature. And in a Logic App, both Logic App Standard and Consumption, and I'm going to guess Power Automate probably has that as well, although I must admit I've never actually checked it in Power Automate. But they have this action which uses something called the Log Analytics Data Collector API. And the action basically lets you write a custom message and send it to Log Analytics. So you kind of do that login work yourself rather than letting the platform do it for you. But there are some benefits of that. So here, if we go back to the loaded railcar consumption Logic App, remember this time. So I've got this action here. Some people might have spotted it earlier, but send data. And what I do is I basically go, here's my Log Analytics key and namespace and stuff, and I just say, right, here's the custom log I want you to write to. And what I usually do is just do a quite simple JSON message. You can inject, you can do more complicated things like inject a message in here and stuff, but usually I just take some key properties from our Logic app and just write them in, and usually I would write the workflow name and ID in as well. And I can do the exact same thing here for for standard Logic apps, where I'm just passing the same kind of data. And what that means is over in my log analytics, so I've got this custom log, and if we just have a look what's happening here, so all of those are right into this custom log, and I can start kind of looking at the data coming in. So you can see here I've got Logic app name, I've got the ID, and I've got those values that I chose to log. So I might do, I can do something like a project time generated, say key one, name, so a really simple query like that, it'll just give me, here's a list of all the Logic apps that have processed a message recently. Here's the load slip ID that they used, and I can then just search for a given load slip ID. So, the most common support query would be, right, we had this rail car, here's its ID, what happened to it? So I can go and find all the Logic apps. I've got the ID, so I can go and search for them in the run history, and then we can do whatever we're going to do from this. That's a really easy way, but it does require some code changes to add that shape, but it gives you that simple login option. Okay, next one we're going to look at views on your data. So this one I think is really where you can start understanding the structure of the login data and kind of do some cool stuff with it. So if we take a look at those tables that we had in Log Analytics, so we've got a few of them. So the ones up here that I'm showing are out of the box ones. This one at the bottom is the custom one that I used myself. Now the key tables that you're probably going to be interested in are app traces and app requests. App requests would be more functions and API are going to do them. Your traces might be any log.information you do. Logic apps quite heavily uses app requests and app traces, and basically every action has one of those in it. And my my custom one I write to when I choose to write to it. So what we've got is the option of, if we think back to our App Insights and Log Analytics relationship earlier, we had those few different App Insights instances all share that same Log Analytics, and I can now create views of that. So I can take a look at some workbooks we created, we'll look at in a second. So I can have, almost like a single pane of glass for a specific scenario. So I'll show you the railcar tracking one I've created, but you can do it for, App Insight, for Log Analytics, clear my head a minute, for Logic apps, functions. And one of the things we did at this customer was we created a Power BI management dashboard, which became the thing that senior management team were looking at, and it's just based on our log data. And what we did is, if we take a look in the resource group here, so using queries from that data from either Log Analytics or App Insights, depending on whether you want to treat it as like views or the raw tables under the hood, I've got these different workbooks I've created. So I'll just close a couple of tabs here. So the first one I want to show you is the railcar tracking one, because I think this gives a good illustration of the differences, if I remember right, between the logging. So how many events have I got logged? So in the last 24 hours, which is what this workbook focuses on, these three tables on the right here, the metrics, the traces, and the requests, they're all things that out of the box get logged by API functions and Logic apps. So that traces and requests in particular, and I guess the metrics is probably the biggest one as well. You're talking what, like 200,000 events in the last 24 hours with me not doing anything. So that means I've got a lot of data there that I need to kind of factor into my queries. So that's why using the out of the box stuff's dead easy to use, but the mining of the data is that little bit more difficult. So just kind of be aware of that. But over here, you can see I've got my custom log, and there's like 600 messages in it, just because I've only processed, probably 100 rail cars or something like that. And if we have a look at the differences of the queries, so in here you can see this is my Logic app consumption. So I just want a flat table showing me, using the tracked properties on that parse JSON action, can I get a list of all the rail cars we've processed through that logic app? So you can see I've got resource group, workflow name, run ID, tracking ID, and it's quite a complicated query because it's using that data that comes from the log analytics stuff. So I'm querying here, and I've just looked for anything that's got a load slip ID as a tracked property. Now, if I had loads of logic apps here, I might want to filter by logic app and a few other things just to get exactly what I'm after. But you can use the projection to create a flat table with the data you need. I've then got the logic app standard, and you'll be to see here the query is a little bit more complicated because now I'm looking at the app traces and I'm looking for a workflow action end event. So this is where the track properties will go on that particular event because you'll get trace events for the start and end. And then I can pass into the tracked properties here. So I'm not going to look at the detail of the log event itself, but I can just parse it out, extend these columns, create my projection to get my flat table, and then I kind of get the same view here of, you know, what action, which workflow, the run ID, the load slip ID. But then the bottom one you'll see, this is my custom log, and we kind of looked at this a little bit before, is my query is just even simpler because I just query the log and I just get the fields that I want, and I might filter by logic app or something. So you've got 3 different ways of creating that flat list of rail cars. It just depends what way is kind of best suited for you. Now, we've got a couple of other workbooks that I think might be quite interesting for a quick 30-second look at. So I'll just open these up. And I've got in the links I'm going to share later, I've got some more blog posts that talk about how you do these, but here we've got a logic app standard analysis. So I'm able to do some queries with that log data to get things like how many workflows have ran in the last 24 hours, workflows completed as just a quick list of them, how many failed. I can start mining for things like errors. This one here, which actions in your workflow are taking the longest to run, so you can look for performance bottlenecks. When do the long run actions happen? So it might be one time of day, certain actions take longer than others, and you can mine into that down there. And then likewise with APIM, I can look at things like how long my requests are, what my load profile's like, what my errors. You know, some of these you can get as queries that just come with App Insights, but I quite like creating that one-page view so I can just go and get a daily summary of what's happening. So this is like what operations are being used, and I think my favorite one, if I remember right, is this one here. So one of the big challenges on a big integration platform, if we've got 150 API operations and 1,000 logic apps, which logic app uses which API? That's quite a difficult question to answer. But in log analytics and App Insights, you'll find logic apps actually send some headers. So if we have a look at this query here, you'll be to see that every call from a logic app actually injects these headers on the message automatically, the run ID, the resource group, and the workflow ID. So I can actually go and work out which logic app calls which API. And this is the query for the errors, but the other one's basically the same. And I can just, you know, get that in the query, bend the data, and work out how many calls from each logic app we've had, which I think is a really good governance query, because you might find some APIs after 6 months don't get used, some get used by multiple logic apps. So if I change an API because one logic app's got a change request, it might affect another logic app that also shares it, is one of the challenges. And then we'll have a quick look at the last one before we wrap up for some questions. I think looking at it, there's been a couple of questions have come in during the chat. So this time we're going to look at availability testing. And I think this is probably one everyone can benefit from quite easily. And the questions, how do I know if all of the key apps and services in my architecture are available? So as you build your integration platform and the architecture it depends on, so things like SAP, Dataverse, you know, I'd argue maybe it's unfair, but from my perspective as an integration person, far too high a percentage of support incidents are actually because the application we integrate with isn't working or has a problem or is broken. It becomes the integration team's problem because the interface didn't work, but it ends up being the fixes that the application that was either down or had a bug that gets sorted and the integration never was broken in the first place. So the question is, how can you check if some of those dependencies are working? And you can include your own stuff as well as other people's stuff in this. So one of the things that we did is we build a health API in API management, and it just sends requests to different things. So here I've got in my background function, I can put a health function in that I can just ping and check it's working. I can have a logic app on my logic app standard plan that just takes a request, returns it and says, yeah, I'm fine. We can have one that sends to service bus and returns a good, but we can also check things like Dataverse. And in our one, we've got a bunch of SOAP and OData services from SAP. So I can actually ping them and check that they're available. And what we do is from APIM, we set up some App Insights availability tests to ping them on a regular basis, and then we can get alerts. But we also created another management dashboard to be able to see what's going on. So if we have a quick look back over in the resource group here, so we go to APIM and have a quick look. So you'll notice in my APIs we've got this this health API. Now, you know, the number of times I've had this scenario where somebody's done a deployment or things have changed and we need to know, is this system working properly? Just being able to go here and go, oh, let's take our SAP check, go to test, and we can just go one click. Yep, it's good. Yep, fingers crossed 200 back, so we know that's good. But actually these here, they do different things. So like the Cosmos one and the Dataverse one, they ping a logic app that goes and does the check for us. But the key thing is getting them into API management just gives us that single place to go to check everything. And then with App Insights, I can go and use this this feature for availability testing over here, and you can create this this URL ping test, and we can just put the URL to call APIM, and then we can set up all of these tests here that you can see. So I don't know if that one's broken, maybe there. And you can see I've got a test for each of these dependencies that I've got both inside and outside the integration platform. And if we take the Dataverse one, you can see that we've got a, you know, kind of a scatter of when it's ran, if it was successful or not. And I can actually then query the data. One of the things that you can do with these management dashboards, so we go and I'll just find the log analytics workspace a minute. So you can do the same in App Insights as well as if you write your query. So I think availability requests is where those tests go. So we can kind of see the tests in here. You might recognize the names from the last one. And I could write, you know, I could write a query that'll summarize by over a certain period of time what an SLA is. And then what I can do is I can actually just go and export that and I get an M query. So if I let that download and open, and that basically gives me something that I give to our Power BI team, and they just use that, and we can give them a key for the logs, and then that's how the management dashboard was built, and it was really quick and easy to do. And but it gives us loads of value because we know how the systems are performing. If one system is regularly having issues, it becomes visible, and we can, you know, we can create the need to be able to deal with that that poor performing app. Okay, so let's summarize and have a look at some of these questions. So there's lots of ways that I can use log analytics and App Insights. The thing I wanted to get across today was a few use cases that people might go, oh, I recognize that problem. Let's check this out and see if we can use it to help us. I wanted to get across that there's a couple of limitations in that end-to-end tracing. I showed how you can work around it by using the function instead of the service bus listener, but I think there is definitely a gap there that hopefully Microsoft will figure out. I'm not sure whether there might be probably gaps with some of the other connectors as well, but you can, you know, one of the things is you can do exactly what I did, which is just do a wildcard search in log analytics once the data is all together under the hood, and you'll be to find the full end-to-end trace. I don't think it's a major problem in stopping us troubleshoot. It's just be aware of the limitation. The biggest thing I would say about log analytics and App Insights, beware of the cost. So the more data you log and the longer you keep that data for, the more it costs. Be aware of that. And what, you know, one of the things I was saying about certainly Logic Apps is probably the biggest one that'll send a lot of data to App Insights. So you need to think about whether you want to configure that with some of the host settings. decide what things you want to send. And I guess maybe some of your logic apps that have higher usage where you don't need the log data as much, you might throttle back on how much you use App Insights for it, and other ones you might use it more. But I think that's the key thing about deciding when do you really need this data to help you and when you don't. And if, in some cases it might be better using that custom logger API with a connector to be able to do your own logging where it gives you what you need. But it's great. Hey, you know what? It's great to have the choices to be able to decide what's best for you, and you can combine them depending on which workflow needs what. So hopefully that was really good. The link to more info. So I've put a blog post out there earlier. It's got a few links to a few different things people probably want to check out. There's some. There's a whole bunch of stuff. There's my integrate video from last year. Does a real deep dive on some of this stuff, particularly for logic apps. So that might be of interest. There's a few articles about the APIM stuff. There's some serverless 360 articles we've put out about some stuff people might find interesting as well. So I'm hoping that that's a really good, useful session. I will go through the questions. Raz, I don't know if you want to go through them, or do you want me to just flick through them and see what people are saying?
Thank you, Mike. Yes, it was a very, very, very useful session, and I think you've sparked a lot of conversation in the chat there. So Suance is asking, hi, Mike, with multiple app insights, won't that make it difficult to get an end-to-end overview, i.e. from APIM to the logic app?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question. That's really why, this slide right early on, if we go right back, this one here. So I think this is one of the big changes with App Insights when they changed it to be a workbook-based, a workspace-based App Insights. So all your App Insights really use the same log analytics under the hood. Before that change, it would have been difficult, like Suan says there, to see that end-to-end. And you would have had to share the App Insights, but that gives you a different problem, because then you start having things like when you get that live telemetry, if you've got 3 or 4 different function app plans and the app API management all sharing that live metrics, you can't really tell whose loads for where very easily. So there's 2 different problems you had. But I think since they bought the workspace version in, I really try to describe it as thinking as your App Insights is really like a view on the log analytics, where it gives you like a sort of a specific scope where you're looking at it from that if we take the EDMS function here, that App Insights is just a view on the log data for that component. So I think, and hopefully as we went through, you could see how it does actually wire the data together when you do the transaction search, because the data is all in the same log analytics under the hood. It can actually like drill into it and inspect across the different App Insight instances. So I think you get the best of both worlds, but again, just beware of that limitation.
So Suwans continues that one of the biggest problems I've encountered with function app services with App Insights is to get insight into failure of app function start. For that, it seems that you need to enable diagnostics and forward that to the log analytics. Do you have any tips for this?
Do you know, I'm not sure I've really come across that particularly. I think is he thinking of like the startup class within the function app? And I'm guessing that might be the case there, where if the kind of dependency injection stuff doesn't all fire up on startup, you might not have the telemetry enabled at that point. I think in there it's probably a case if you want to use the localized function login to kind of give you some ability to see what was going on. But again, that like with our stuff, that's where them health APIs come in. So we quite often would put like a health API in so we can check the functions working before it really starts getting a lot of the traffic on it and stuff. And I think that mitigates a lot of that problem. But I think I'm not sure you can really do anything with App Insights if it's before the DI kicks. And I guess the one thing maybe depending on your plan, you might, because like with an app service plan, for example, you can have it where it's picking up some of the server level stuff as well. So you might get some stuff in there, but I'd have to check on that.
Great. Massimo was asking, hi, Mike, do you segregate the access to the monitoring data? For example, use case 1 cannot see the data of use case 2. If yes, which technique would you advise?
Yeah, good question. So I think that's where, I guess really the questions about this, what kind of segregation you want and who looks at your data. I think to me, one of the things here is that you know, when you think of like the support operator, to me, App Insights and Log Analytics are probably for your most technically experienced people to really get the most out of that data. So you're likely to be mining the logs quite a bit anyway. But I think, yeah, if you do have separation requirements, that's where you can have different log analytics and different App Insights instances to limit that somewhat. But I think that's a great question. I think that, you know, it's probably quite a lot harder than it maybe wants to be. I'd say on that one. But you can just create different instances of stuff. I think what one problem would be if you've got one function app with two functions with different different operation contexts where you want to say a person can't see this but can see that. I'd say that would probably be something where those functions should live in different function apps. So you do create that separation. But I think that's a great architecture question to think about.
So Jesper is asking, are there any best practices regarding how many App Insight instances to use, when to use one instance or when to use multiple?
Can I just say, Raz, I think that's kind of the same question that was asked a bit earlier. Yeah, if there's anything else on that, feel free to like reach out on Twitter or anything. But I don't know if maybe you want to assume that we've answered that earlier and jump on to the next one.
Yeah. So Suwant is back to ask, hi, I have usually used one App Insights instance per environment. What advantages do you get of having multiple instances per environment? Is it mainly isolating access? Yeah.
So I think you know, it's definitely a horses for courses answer, that one. You can do both. I prefer the separation because I just find when you start doing like the performance and the error failures one, and particularly the live monitoring, I find it really difficult to work out which thing, like which performance stuff belongs to which component. So if I've got, let's say I've got two function apps that live on different function app plans and an APIM, when they all share the same App Insights, like how do you know which plans having a performance problem and which isn't? Now you could work it out, but it just becomes a lot harder for you. So that's why I like to separate it out, and I would tend to do an App Insights instance per function app plan or per app service plan, one per API management. And then when it comes to Logic App Standard, I'd all the Logic apps that are on the same plan would share the same App Insights, would be my default. And that's the kind of separation I'd go for, but I'd usually share the same log analytics under the hood.
Thank you, Mike. So one final question, guys. We've run out of time. So one final question. How do you send health pings from App Insights without OAuth token subkey on the API? Or are you including a master key in the App Insights ping test to have access to all the APIs?
Yeah, so what I did in the demo and what we've done, just to keep it simple, we've just created a unique subscription key just for the health API, and you put it in the URL ping as a code. So that's the easy way to do it. There are some issues with that. So if you are in an environment where that would be something you're uncomfortable with, so there are other options you can take. So I think you can connect your App Insights to a network, but I think that probably won't help you because often the App Insights runs on the edge network. So what I might do in that case is potentially call a function app and then just put that little bit more code that you want to do the auth stuff in the function app if you want to make it a bit more secure. But I think that there is definitely some bits where we wish you could do more with that. There are third-party products that you can trigger your pings from as well. The other thing actually that I've done once as well that you could do is you could do a recurring logic app that did the ping for you and called the API, and you could do an auth in there if you wanted to. I think it's just really what works for you for driving it. So, you know, I might, in this case, we're just doing something simple by hitting it from the test, but you could have a man in the middle where you could trigger a logic app, or you could trigger, you know, just use the logic app to drive the load and do it that way. There's a few different choices, I think, depending on what you need.
Thank you once again, Mike. Lots of great feedback, as you can see in the comments. And just to finish off, Sandro's saying, I have to say, great session. Your cabin is getting bigger every day.
Have you seen my little Lego men on? I don't know if you can see them. I've got my little army of Lego men on top of the big screen there. So
nice.
Yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of the event, and cracking job, Raz. You guys have done a really good job this week.
Thank you once again, Mike. That's Michael Stevenson. So make sure you follow him on his blog, on Twitter. Feel free to share your details in the chat, Mike.
Yeah, I think I'll just put that last. Where are we? There's the link if anybody wants it.
Fantastic. Once again, big, huge thank you to Michael Stevenson, covering a very, very important topic today. So now we are on to our next session. So I would like to introduce